By the middle of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire had reduced war to a system. Conquest was no longer chaos or chance, it was mathematics. From the plains of northern China to the gates of Europe, Mongol armies moved with mechanical precision, crushing kingdoms that had stood for centuries. Cities fell not because they were weak, but because resistance itself had become irrational. The Mongols didn't just defeat armies, they defeated the idea of fighting back. Across Asia and Eastern Europe, the pattern repeated with terrifying consistency. Advanced scouts mapped the land. Intelligence networks identified political centers. Cavalry formations isolated leaders, destroyed supply lines, and forced surrender before battles even began. The Mongols did not need to conquer every soldier. They only needed to destroy the structure that held societies together. Once leadership collapsed, everything else followed. By 1240, this system appeared flawless. No terrain had stopped it. No culture had resisted it. No military doctrine had found a counter. The Mongols were not simply winning wars, they were rewriting what war meant. And then they reached the northern edge of Europe. What happened next was not a great battle, not a dramatic last stand, and not a heroic defeat. It was something far more unsettling. The Mongol Empire encountered a society that could not be conquered in the way all others had been, not because it was stronger, but because it was built differently. The lands of Scandinavia and the northern Baltic were unlike anything Mongol commanders had previously faced. There were no imperial capitals to capture, no centralized monarchs whose deaths would end resistance, no dense agricultural heartlands that could be seized to force submission. Power here was not concentrated. It was scattered across fjords, islands, forests, and independent warrior communities bound by loyalty rather than command. Mongol doctrine relied on reconnaissance, but in these territories, reconnaissance broke down, settlements were small, mobile, and deliberately isolated. Supply routes vanished into forests. Coastal communities could evacuate by sea faster than cavalry could pursue by land. There was no single target whose destruction would trigger collapse. For the first time, Mongol intelligence reports did not produce clear solutions. When Mongol forces probed deeper, they discovered another problem: terrain. Steppe cavalry, the deadliest military formation of its age, required open ground, speed, and maneuverability. Scandinavia offered none of these in abundance. Dense forests choked movement. Frozen wetlands swallowed horses. Narrow coastal corridors turned mobility into liability. Naval-based defenders could strike and vanish before retaliation was possible. The Vikings, by this period no longer raiders but seasoned regional warriors, did not fight as a unified army. They fought as a distributed network. Each settlement was capable of independent defense. Each loss did not weaken the whole. There was no decisive blow the Mongols could land. Even when engagements occurred, the advantages that had defined Mongol supremacy became weaknesses. Cavalry charges lost momentum in broken terrain. Encirclement tactics failed against enemies who refused to mass. Psychological warfare lost its power against communities accustomed to generations of conflict and hardship. Most critically, the cost of conquest began to outweigh the benefits. Mongol campaigns were not driven by pride or vengeance. They were driven by calculation. Every invasion was evaluated in terms of resources gained versus resources consumed. Scandinavia offered no vast cities to tax, no dense populations to control, no strategic corridor. that justified extended occupation. Victory here would require long-term commitment, high attrition, and constant resistance, an unacceptable equation for an empire expanding on multiple fronts. So the Mongols did something they almost never did. They disengaged, not in defeat, not in retreat under pressure, but in deliberate withdrawal. The war machine assessed the problem, ran the numbers, and chose to turn elsewhere toward lands where conquest still made sense. This moment was not recorded as a great battle because it wasn't one. It was erased precisely because it contradicted the myth of unstoppable expansion. Empires prefer stories of domination, not restraint. The Scandinavian communities did not defeat the Mongols on the battlefield. They achieved something far rarer. They made themselves strategically invincible by being strategically inconvenient. History often remembers victories measured in blood and banners, but this was a victory measured in denial, the denial of conquest itself. The Mongols met a society that could not be broken by decapitation, terror, or speed. A society that refused to present a target worth destroying. This is not the story of how the Mongol Empire lost. It is the story of how even the most advanced military system in human history encountered its limits not through force, but through structure. The Vikings did not stop the Mongols with strength. They stopped them with design. And that may be the most devastating kind of victory history has ever seen. By the early 13th century, the Mongol Empire had transformed warfare into a science. Conquest was no longer fueled by rage or ambition alone. It was executed with discipline, intelligence, and ruthless efficiency. From the deserts of Central Asia to the forests of Eastern Europe, the Mongols moved like an unstoppable mechanism, dismantling entire civilizations with frightening consistency. Resistance was punished. Submission was rewarded. Survival depended on understanding one brutal truth. The Mongol war machine did not make across 2 continents. The pattern repeated itself. Cities that resisted were erased. Those that surrendered were absorbed and taxed. Mongol armies advanced faster than news of their arrival, leaving panic in their wake. Chinese dynasties collapsed under pressure. Persian cities burned. Russian principalities fractured almost overnight. The Mongols didn't simply defeat armies, they collapsed political systems, replacing chaos with control. What made the Mongols so effective was not just their cavalry or archery, but their intelligence network. Scouts rode ahead mapping terrain, population centers, and supply routes. Spies gathered information on leaders, rivalries, and weaknesses. Every campaign began with knowledge, not bloodshed. By the time battle came, the outcome was often already decided. Mongol strategy relied on a single devastating principle: destroy the structure and the rest collapses. Kill the king, break the nobility, shatter command, and resistance dissolves. This method worked everywhere, from fortified Chinese cities to European feudal states, because power was centralized. Remove the head and the body fell. By 1240, the Mongols stood at the edge of what seemed like an inevitable future. No army had stopped them, no terrain had defeated them, no culture had escaped them. To the world, the Mongol Empire appeared infinite in momentum, limitless in reach. Then the empire's gaze turned north toward lands that did not fit the pattern. Beyond the familiar battlefields lay the cold forests, islands, and coastlines of Scandinavia and the northern Baltic. These were not imperial territories. They were fragmented worlds of scattered settlements, maritime warriors, and deeply rooted local autonomy. At first glance, these lands appeared weak. No grand cities, no imperial armies, no centralized monarchs ruling vast populations. To a Mongol commander, this looked like an easy conquest. But appearances in warfare can be deadly illusions. Mongol reconnaissance teams moved forward, and for the first time, their reports created confusion instead of clarity. There were no major population centers to target. No single leader whose death would end resistance. Villages were small, isolated, and capable of disappearing into forests or fleeing by sea. The Mongol system required identifiable pressure points. Scandinavia offered none. Power was distributed rather than concentrated. Authority was local, flexible, and resistant to decapitation. Destroying one settlement changed nothing elsewhere. Even terrain betrayed the Mongols. Their greatest weapon, fast, maneuverable cavalry, was crippled by dense forests, frozen wetlands, narrow mountain passes, and broken coastlines. Horses bogged down. Formations fractured. Speed, once their advantage, became a liability. Meanwhile, the defenders understood their land intimately. Norse warriors were not standing armies. They were community fighters accustomed to harsh climates, limited resources, and constant threat. They did not need orders from distant rulers. They acted independently, decisively, and without denial. Where Mongol armies relied on open fields and sweeping maneuvers, Scandinavian terrain forced close combat, ambushes, and attrition. Battles were smaller, messier, and far less decisive. There was no single moment of collapse to exploit. At sea, the imbalance grew worse. Mongol forces were land-based. Scandinavian communities were maritime. Settlements could evacuate by ship faster than Mongol cavalry could pursue. Coastal defenders could strike and vanish, choosing when and where conflict occurred. This was warfare without an endpoint. No capital to sack. No treasury to seize. No political structure to replace. Every engagement cost resources without delivering strategic reward. Mongol commanders began encountering a problem they rarely faced: diminishing returns. Each advance demanded more effort than the last. Each victory produced less gain. Losses of men, horses, supplies accumulated without compensating reward. Psychological warfare also failed. The Mongols were famous for terror tactics, but Scandinavian societies were hardened by centuries of conflict and environmental hardship. Fear did not break them. It merely confirmed what they already believed: survival required resistance. Mongol doctrine emphasized rapid conquest followed by stabilization. Scandinavia offered only endless resistance. Occupation would require permanent garrisons, constant patrols, and ongoing conflict across inhospitable terrain. The empire faced a strategic dilemma. Resources committed here could not be used elsewhere. At the same time, richer, more vulnerable territories lay open to the south and east, lands where conquest still promised profit, control, and expansion. This forced the Mongols to do something rarely acknowledged in imperial history: calculate restraint. Conquest was not about pride. It was about sustainability, and Scandinavia failed the equation. There was no decisive defeat, no final battle, no heroic stand recorded in chronicles. Instead, Mongol forces gradually disengaged, redirecting attention to territories that aligned with their doctrine of efficient empire building. History often misinterprets this moment as absence, as if nothing happened. But in reality, something extraordinary occurred. The most powerful military system of its era encountered a society it could not efficiently dominate. The Norse defenders did not defeat the Mongols by strength or numbers. They defeated them by being structurally incompatible with conquest. Their political fragmentation was not weakness, it was armor. Every village was a fortress, every coastline an escape route. Every loss was localized, never catastrophic. Resistance did not require coordination, it was automatic. For the Mongols, this meant endless cost without resolution. An empire that thrived on decisive outcomes found itself trapped in ambiguity. Empires do not record indecision well. Chronicles celebrate victories, not calculations. As a result, this confrontation faded from mainstream history, not because it was insignificant, but because it challenged the myth of inevitability. Yet this moment matters deeply. It reveals that conquest is not just about strength, it is about compatibility. Even the most powerful force in history can fail if the target cannot be efficiently absorbed. The Mongols did not retreat in shame. They withdrew in logic. They recognized that victory here would not look like victory elsewhere, and so they chose a different direction. In doing so, they exposed the limits of empire. Limits not imposed by armies, but by systems, terrain, and social structure. The Scandinavian world survived not because it destroyed the Mongols, but because it refused to become valuable prey. This was not glory, it was deterrence. Not triumph, but denial. History remembers conquerors who burn cities. It rarely remembers societies that quietly make conquest impossible. But this silent resistance reshaped the map just as profoundly as any battle. The Mongol Empire expanded elsewhere, but here it stopped not with a roar, but with calculation. And in that decision lies a lesson still relevant today. Power has limits, and not all victories are won through force. Some are won by refusing to present a target worth taking. Some are won by surviving rather than conquering. Some are won by structure rather than strength. This was the encounter history forgot, not because it lacked drama, but because it lacked spectacle. Yet it stands as one of the most revealing moments in military history, the day the unstoppable force chose not to advance. By the beginning of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire had achieved something no civilization before it had managed: the conversion of chaos into a system. What appeared to the outside world as uncontrolled destruction was, in reality, one of the most carefully structured military doctrines ever created. The Mongols did not conquer through sheer numbers or blind aggression. They conquered through information, speed, discipline, and an unrelenting understanding of cause and effect. Every campaign followed logic. Every victory was calculated. Every defeat, rare as it was, became a lesson absorbed into doctrine. This was not an empire driven by emotion. It was an empire driven by efficiency. From the grasslands of Mongolia, the empire expanded outward like a shockwave. Entire regions fell not because they were weak, but because they were predictable. Chinese dynasties relied on bureaucratic centralization. Persian cities depended on fortified urban centers. Russian principalities were divided but still hierarchically organized. Each of these systems presented identifiable targets: kill the leadership, destroy the administrative centers, break the army in one decisive engagement. The Mongols understood that power concentrated itself, and wherever power concentrated, it could be shattered. Their armies moved faster than any force in history. Cavalry units could cover distances in days that took others weeks. Communication systems allowed commands to travel across vast territories with unprecedented speed. Supply chains were mobile and flexible. Soldiers lived off the land without exhausting it. Every soldier was trained from childhood to fight, ride, and adapt. And above all, Mongol commanders were given autonomy. They were expected to think, improvise, and act independently while remaining aligned with the empire's strategic objectives. By the year 1240, the Mongol Empire had crushed nearly every military tradition it encountered. Resistance had become futile. Cities that defied them were annihilated as examples. Cities that surrendered were absorbed, taxed, and left intact. This pattern spread terror ahead of the army, often causing entire regions to collapse without a major battle. The Mongols did not simply win wars, they ended them before they began. It was at this peak, when their dominance seemed absolute, that the Mongols approached, a region that did not behave like the rest of the world. To the north lay lands shaped not by empire, but by environment. Scandinavia and the northern Baltic world were not unified states. They were networks of communities shaped by cold, sea, forest, and isolation. These societies had no grand capitals, no centralized armies, no emperors whose deaths would bring collapse. From a Mongol perspective, they looked insignificant, and that assumption would quietly unravel one of history's greatest war machines. Mongol reconnaissance units were the first to encounter the anomaly. Their reports were unusually vague. There were no population centers large enough to justify siege warfare. Settlements were scattered, lightly fortified, and capable of abandonment at short notice. Leaders held authority locally, often temporarily, and command structures shifted fluidly. Even when villages were destroyed, resistance elsewhere remained unaffected. The Mongol intelligence system, so effective elsewhere, struggled to form a coherent picture. Terrain compounded the problem. Mongol warfare depended on open land. Speed, maneuverability, and massed cavalry formations were essential to their tactics. Scandinavia offered none of this. Dense forests limited movement and visibility. Marshlands swallowed horses. Mountains fractured formations. Frozen ground damaged hooves and supply logistics. Rivers and fjords acted as natural barriers, forcing Mongol units into narrow corridors where ambush was not just possible, it was inevitable. The Mongols had faced difficult terrain before, but never terrain that negated their advantages so completely. Every kilometer advanced required exponentially more effort. Every engagement carried disproportionate cost. The empire's defining strength, its momentum slowed to a crawl. The people inhabiting these lands did not fight like imperial armies. Norse warriors were not professional soldiers in centralized formations. They were farmers, traders, sailors, and hunters who took up arms when needed. Their societies were built around adaptability. They had survived centuries of harsh climate, limited resources, and constant conflict. Violence was not extraordinary, it was integrated into life. Crucially, these communities did not rely on standing armies. There was no force to annihilate, no regiment to destroy. Defense was decentralized. Each settlement fought independently, drawing on local knowledge and terrain. Losses were absorbed without systemic collapse. There was no moment where defeat cascaded across the region. At sea, the imbalance grew even more severe. Scandinavian societies were maritime by necessity. Their ships were not just tools of trade or exploration, they were lifelines. Entire populations could relocate rapidly along coastlines and islands. Mongol forces accustomed to land warfare could not pursue effectively. Coastal raids yielded little reward. Targets vanished before capture. Supply lines stretched dangerously thin. Mongol commanders began to recognize a fundamental problem. This was not a war that could be finished. Even victory offered no strategic closure. Occupation would require permanent military presence across hostile, fragmented territory with no guarantee of control. Every garrison would be isolated, every patrol vulnerable. Every resource expended would produce diminishing returns. This realization marked a turning point. The Mongols were not conquerors driven by ideology or destiny. They were pragmatic. Empire building was a business, and Scandinavia was proving to be a poor investment. While resources were being consumed in the north, vast and wealthy territories elsewhere remained ripe for conquest lands with cities, tribute systems, and centralized governance that could be exploited efficiently. At no point did the Mongols suffer a catastrophic defeat in the north. There was no climactic battle, no legendary last stand. Instead, there was something far more unusual in military history. A quiet recalculation. Commanders reported increasing costs and limited gains. Strategic planners assessed alternatives. And slowly, deliberately, attention shifted elsewhere. This decision has confused historians for centuries. Traditional narratives struggle to explain absence. Wars are remembered through battles, victories, and defeats. Withdrawals motivated by logic rather than force do not fit comfortably into heroic history. As a result, the Mongol encounter with Scandinavia faded into obscurity, not because it was unimportant, but because it challenged the mythology of unstoppable conquest. The Norse societies did not defeat the Mongols through superior strength or organization. They defeated them by being structurally unconquerable. Their fragmentation, often interpreted as weakness, became their shield. Without centralized authority, there was no center to destroy. Without dense population, there was no decisive prize. Without fixed borders, there was no clear front line. This form of resistance was invisible, yet effective. It denied the Mongols what they needed most, resolution. And without resolution, empire building becomes unsustainable. The Mongols expanded elsewhere, achieving further victories that cemented their legacy. But here, at the edge of the known world, their advance stopped. Not because they were beaten, but because conquest itself lost meaning. This moment offers a rare insight into the true limits of power. Even the most advanced military system in history could not impose control on a society that refused to present itself as conquerable. Strength failed where structure prevailed. In the end, the Vikings did not win a war. They survived one. And in survival, they demonstrated a truth that history often forgets. Sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating an empire, but making it irrelevant. The Mongols did the math, and they turned away